Hello, my name's Alison Buchanan. I'm the artistic director of Pegasus Opera Company. And this year we're celebrating our 30th year. And we're here to discuss and have a chat about the Windrush Opera that we've commissioned. So Pegasus is a registered charity, and we have a three-part mission. One, to provide opportunities for artists of diverse backgrounds, staging operas and concerts, and we have a mentorship program. Secondly, to promote opera among young people in underserved communities to expand their cultural horizon. And thirdly, to promote opera in culturally diverse communities for all ages. Pegasus was started 30 years by my friend Lloyd Newton, who was a Jamaican tenor who found that there were a lack of opportunity for artists of color in England. And so he thought about this line, harmony and diversity. And he started this opera company 30 years. We're still sort of having the same conversations 30 years later. But, you know, we work tirelessly to address the imbalance and to make a difference, which I'm pleased to say that we are. So coming into our 30 years, we had to think about what we wanted to do. And we wanted to commission an opera that spoke of our stories. You know, growing up, I would hear as a child sitting under the table when the adults all came together from the different parts of the country or the family. I would sit under the table because children should be seen and not heard. And then if I made myself obvious, I would be kicked out. So I would sit under the table and I would listen to their stories about arriving and early days in England. And so, you know, as our community, it's all of our stories. And after in 2018, when David Lammy brought the whole Windrush scandal to light, and it all, you know, kicked off about that, and now we have Windrush Day. So we wanted to tell these stories, and so, well, let's commission an opera, and it's the first opera that we have been able to do of its kind, and I think that's very fitting for 30 years, celebrating 30 years of work. And so we decided to sort of find an amazing creative team, which we have done. And I would like to introduce our wonderful creative team. We have our librettist is Pat Cumper. Now, did I say that right? Cumper.
Cumper, yes, Cumper.
That's absolutely right. I'm going to get it wrong. Okay, so who has so many accomplishments. She's a British playwright, producer, director, critic, commentator, theatre administrator. She was born in Jamaica and has had over 30 years of experience in writing plays for television and radio and theatre and radio. And I think probably maybe her most challenging job is grandmother.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. And thank you, Pat. And then Des Oliver. So Des is a filmmaker and a composer extraordinaire. Like I said, he studied at the Guildhall and Royal Academy of Music. You were Joe Wood, or are Joe Wood composer in residence, and have had wonderful commissions, including London Symphony Orchestra and around the country. So we are delighted to have you both as part of our creative team. I'm going to say you've been following in my footsteps, Jez.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Because it's kind of true, because I'm older than you.
Right.
So our feet have trod on similar places in Bedford.
It's kind of strange, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, I feel like maybe I did hear about you, because you were in youth opera, weren't you? Is that right?
Yes, you could not have not heard about me, because I'm the only Black opera singer from Queen's Park. Yeah. And if you're a Black opera musician, they would have spoken about the other one.
Sure. Yeah. So I think we missed each other not that much. I think a couple.
Right, and then I went to Guildhall, and you went to Guildhall. So you've been following in my footsteps.
I really have. Yeah. Well, you've been the trailblazer. It's been great. So I didn't, I didn't perform at Glyndebourne, so I didn't go the whole hog.
When two people who have never met are brought together to write an opera, how would you begin? What is that process?
What happens?
You want to go first, Des?
Sure. Certainly for me, I think what happens is there is an immediate sense of underlying panic, I think, because, not just in relation to, I think, writing an opera, which is probably the biggest challenge for a composer. But I think particularly, and certainly in relation to you talking, Ali, about sort of Pegasus and its history and its legacy, that tremendous sense of responsibility, not just in relation to the Opera Commission itself, but also the subject matter and the responsibility of speaking on something that is so rich and vibrant and complex and nuanced as the history of Windrush. And so the first thing really you think about is, well, how can one, or how can we go about telling that story that does some justice to it? And also, importantly, what parts of the story to include. And in a way, it's sort of more important, I think, to think about sort of what aspects to leave out of the story than what to include, because there's so much potentially that you could put in. And I think quite sort of early on, we discounted the idea of doing a sort of operatic kind of documentary, and instead, I think, opted for a much more kind of personalized and sort of intimate story. But at the same time, I think we sort of wanted to tell story across different time periods. So you have these sort of very big moments, which are sort of representations of, I suppose, like really sort of important events, which serve as a backdrop to a much more intimate and simpler and sort of character-driven story. And I think in a way, it can be much more powerful to see these sort of events unfold through the eyes of an individual. And there are issues with that too, of course, because, sometimes the characters, maybe the characters we've chosen even, might not necessarily be the most reliable characters through which to view those events, but nevertheless, they are very sort of authentic. And so I think the four main characters really, in my mind at least, represent the different ways in which people can kind of cope with change and conflict and adversity and also status, and I suppose are trying to address the issues of what it means to be kind of true to oneself, which is a question that all of us are addressing on a day-to-day basis. But imagine having to deal with those things, those sort of very normal earthly concerns, but at the same time being transported to a completely different environment, and one that is totally unlike the environment that you thought it would be. And in a way, it kind of reminds me of a conversation I had with someone who was sort of saying, it was something like they were sort of implying that people, let's say, from developing countries don't have like sort of first world problems, like problems with Wi-Fi, right? And it's like, I kind of understood what they meant when they said that. They essentially meant that, those sort of problems that are kind of are insignificant in relation to, say, I don't know, being in the midst of a war zone. But it's also a mistake, I think, to kind of assume that, people, say, in a developing country or in a war zone don't have the same kinds of like superficial problems that all of us have. And I think that when you, in a way, extract that's sort of those superficial surface problems, you almost kind of dehumanize people in a way, because these, for instance, thinking about, I don't know, the recent conflict in Ukraine, these are people who, they also have quite sort of superficial problems and they're in a war zone. And it's that sort of comparison, I think, which makes, these stories kind of so powerful in a way. Sorry, I don't know where I went with that.
I'm going to jump in there because
please, yeah.
there are two things that I think I mean, this story has always fascinated me. The Windrush itself is the center of a movement that has been going on for 100 years of back and forth. So there's an integration between the two societies and a common language. And as I'm working with language, it's amazing to see how much of what's coming up in terms of regional language is also reflected in Victorian language, is reflected in the language that we use here. But the other thing that I really wanted to bring to, because I was born and raised in the Caribbean, and so that rhythm and the sea and the food and everything is in my bones in this, is I wanted also for us to have the joy. Because I get so saddened when the courage and the creativity and the imagination and all the wonderful things that we brought are kind of put into this isn't it awful kind of category. Exactly what Des was saying. Strip away the isn't it awful, and what you have is just great, abundant human life. You have love and jealousy and insecurity and, resilience and creativity and all of those wonderful things that are human. So I think, it is bringing that joy and that celebration I very much wanted to do. And we were well aware of all the problems, and particularly what Windrush means now. But I think we're hoping to root this in celebration of resilience and again of the variety that the Caribbean represents. The fact that there are cultural forms, there are languages, there are, as you well know, ways that we raise our children and cook our food and relate to one another, how we cream our skins, how we play cricket, all of those things that are so integral to being who we are, that we can use little elements of that to make the picture richer. But at the core of it is a common humanity, I think. I think that's what we've agreed on. And Des has a very, very visual sense, and I have a very, very verbal sense. So it's trying to get the two of those sort of together. And it's to me, I've done some work with musicals, some with plays. This is a new experience. So Des is also, I guess, the driver of the car, and I'm sitting in the passenger seat doing my very, very best to navigate. But so far it's been absolutely brilliant, because it's absolutely pushed me to the point of questioning all the things that I do quite, it's not easy, but it's things that are familiar to me. It's now pushing that craft to a different level, and I'm scared, but I love it.
The memory of being the child under the table was the noise. They would argue about or debate all these subjects, and it would be so loud, and then they would erupt in belly laugh, really kind of belly laughing, and even the argument, it was fun. They were having fun debating, and it was just and it was exciting for me, and so that evoked a memory for me.
I think it's a really, really important point, though, because my sense is that a lot of people in the UK who are not from the Caribbean, not from that diasporic, don't have that diasporic heritage. I think when they think of Windrush, all they think about is the Windrush scandal. And of course, it's something that is very, very important for us to acknowledge. But I think, Pat, you, or both of you, actually highlighted the importance of also sharing all of that aspect of colour and richness and joy and happiness. And I think that was something also, I think, that came up during the Rush Commission in talking with the choir, Ali, was that almost immediately there was this kind of, I suppose, like separation in relation to the way in which Windrush should be presented, with some people being quite passionate about the aspects of racism being acknowledged and being recognized, but then others really not wanting to be kind of defined by that in a way. So it's just really interesting to hear both of you talk about that. I think to get back to your original question, Ali, which was really to do with the sort of collaboration process itself, I think at the beginning because I'm quite visual, I think spent just a couple of days literally storyboarding the entire thing and creating basically a kind of comic strip. And I think because an opera is such a big thing, I think, to do for both the composer and the librettist, that we almost needed to have kind of quite big signposts, at least to have a sense. of where we were going, even if we weren't quite sure of what the details were, which I think has been quite, helpful. And it's, for me, has been kind of a joy really to work with Pat, not just because of her passion for the subject matter, and her authenticity and prior work on the subject, but also I think just because of her youthfulness, the youthfulness of her imagination, her willingness to play make-believe, which is combined with a kind of almost sort of like razor sharp perceptiveness, and immediacy in understanding character motivation. So, I'll have a conversation and present some weird and wacky idea, and immediately Pat is able to explain almost all of the character motivations and things that I hadn't even considered previously. And I'm like, oh God, yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
Oh, you mean I've learned something? Yes. Yeah. You realize I'll now have to live up to that, Des. That's tough. That's tough. And I'll say on the other side, working with Des, what is absolutely lovely is I'm given room to do stuff like that. In essence, I suppose what the word that I'm looking for is that he's confident in his form, so that I don't feel that our playing around with anything is stressful. I've worked with artists who've been really defensive and won't change anything and absolutely Des is not like that. He's absolutely, and the idea that the whole thing is huge and we can find our path through it, which I think that original shape gives us, but that we can, as you say, wander off the path and find interesting things, and that's such a joy as an artist to be able to be able to do that. It's you know what it's like working with people who are they have other concerns. I think at this point the joy for me is working with somebody who just wants for us to do a really wonderful piece of work.
Right. Because I was going to say that, in some ways, and please forgive me, I've always been a malapropist, and I don't think it's going to change at this point. So if the words are wrong, the gist is right. But there's something very autocratic about what we both do, in terms of, if you're going to write a play, it's your mind, it's you get the ideas, and it's and you are in control, but you are the one driving the story.
Yeah.
And if we're going to compose something, it's it's what you are feeling. So when you have two people who are creating something together, I would imagine that it would be difficult to kind of come together with the strong ideas, but you're saying that is not the case, and that
oh no, I'd never say it's easy. It's not easy. What is lovely is that there is trust. I think that is important, and it's also, and I don't know if Des feels the same, but I love watching really good craft, because it forces me, I think, to improve mine. Yeah. So there's a huge challenge in it, and it's not a small project. And when you begin even to think about what audiences are going to see and what they're going to say, because we've taken a huge, it's a huge part of the Caribbean community, and it's a huge part of the Black British story. And we're saying we're going to write an opera about it. I mean, that's a thing. That's big.
Yes.
So if wasn't that sort of essential trust, right. And a sense of my ambition, and I think Des shares, is to give the character the dignity that they deserve. So we're talking about maybe ordinary people, maybe somebody who's been a musician in a calypso band for 10 years, but we give them the heroism that they deserve. Even and that's what I've always loved, celebrating the ordinary, the extraordinary in the ordinary, and that I think is and this is an extraordinary art form anyway. So I think there's a natural sort of meeting that happens. Because I fell in love with Avril Warp, who stowed away in Kingston because she wanted to be a seamstress. Apparently her desire was to sew in Paris, so she thought London was a stop on the way. But she was discovered as a stowaway, and the other passengers got together and paid for her ticket so that she could actually get to England. And then along the way, she fell in love. And so she ended up in England and stayed there. But that spirit of adventure, that young Avril who left, that stayed with us, which is why we kept the name. you know. But we're also, we've created a duality in that there's young Avril, and then there's the Avril who's kind of the one that's living now and is remembering all of this and is finding her way through her backstory to her present life. So this is what Des was saying, we're kind of playing around in time, but we're literally looping back through time to understand. So we bring the audience with us through all the events of what, you know, what these, the events that are extraordinary in these ordinary lives. I think that's what we wanted. And we're not looking for stereotypes, but we are looking for fairly archetypal stories, you know, so that we can bring the heart and the emotion and the character to those moments.
You wrote a wonderful Windrush anthem for us. So how does the sound come to you? What compositional techniques do you use? What do you hear it and then start to write it, or are you writing and then it sort of comes to life as you go along? Or
it's like there's usually, like, I think, a handful of questions that composers get asked, as I imagine is the case with singers, and I imagine is the case with writers, and that often is always one. And my honest answer is that there isn't ever one way in which an idea kind of comes to me and in which I write. And you almost have to be kind of a servant to that idea in a way, because very often people can kind of get stuck in terms of writing because they only work one way. So sometimes for me, it might be, usually there is a coloristic aspect. I am a very visual person. And so I think in the initial stages of working on, I think even the one of the arias, the Dominoes arias, which we finished, I was asking Pat all kinds of questions, not just about the way that the characters looked and felt, but what their backstory was, even stuff that wasn't necessarily making its way into the opera, because I need characters to be absolutely real to me. And I think when I can really feel them and see them on stage, then it's a much easier journey for me to start to create music in relation to them, because they're just there. And it's almost like kind of writing film music in a way, because I can see them. Sometimes the ideas come to me and they are almost kind of purely conceptual. So there's no sound at all that's involved, and the sound comes later. And sometimes it's just purely improvisational. And usually it depends on my mood, in essence. So in the mornings, I tend to be a bit more kind of on it and awake and kind of analytical. In the evenings, when my mind is switched off, I usually just allow the music to kind of happen in that way. So yeah, that's probably it really. And just allowing, I suppose, in a way, listening to the characters and with opera, listening to the text is the most important thing, because sometimes you can find, if you're working with any kind of text, that you as a composer might have a very specific idea of the kind of piece that you want to write. And then you come and look at the text and it's like, oh God, like the text is so different from this other music that I've got here. And so the best thing that you can do sometimes is to put that away and really to listen into the music that's already ingrained within the text, which is, I think, an important lesson to learn.
And when you're writing, Pat, are you hearing music in yourself as you thinking?
I'm very, very much have all the old overrides of the characters must be strong, the dialogue must be efficient. I mean, a long discussion that we had with Des about the rest of it really was a huge lesson in making the dialogue strong and clear, but not giving up anything in terms of character. In terms of the musical side of it, I am really worried that what I have is a ta di da di da di da rhythm to my writing, and so I will hear rhythm rather than music, rather than melody. I definitely have, but it's also that some of my rhythms are quite crude. So this is when I'll say to Des, look, this is but actually, if you can take it and make it sophisticated and wonderful, yes, please do. So I'm kind of sort of generating stuff, which I think is quite clear in terms of character and plot and movement and so on. I know where my turning points are. I know what my catalysts are. I know, we've discussed the characters well enough. We have a strong sense of who they are, But in terms of hearing music, not particularly. So I literally have to sit and listen to the music that Des sends to me over and over and over again. Like a teenager listening to a pop song is basically like that. Until I have a really strong idea, I can sort of hum the melody for myself, and then it begins, I begin to feel where the words fit into it. I have to tell you about a really nice little thing that happened. When I was a little girl in Jamaica, there was a group called the Frats Quintet, which was 5 guys who had taken folk songs and had put them into 5-part harmony. And I introduced Des to them because he was interested, of course, in all the different. And he produced scores for them, which is just so wonderful. These songs, which are like a huge part of my childhood, they were played constantly until the grooves wore out on the records almost. And so to have that, it kind of bringing them back up and giving them a form that anybody could sing them, it just gave me such joy. And that was just like a little throwaway thing that he did.
Did you ever see them performing live, or? Yes,
once or twice. I mean, at the Ward Theatre, which was a big theatre in downtown Kingston, and it was a thing. I mean, the Frats Quintet were, these were men who had, jobs, and this was the thing they did out of their passion. But the fact that they'd taken traditional folk songs and given them this treatment, whereas, there was that whole post-colonial mentality of, oh, well, it's just thing poor people sing. And they brought it into the theatre, and they've given it form, and they've given it performance and joy. It meant a lot. It meant a lot in Jamaica at that time. You understand, it's also slightly colonial in the sense that they're using a 5-part harmony and suits and all of the format of a different culture, but the respect and the joy that they brought to singing it, and how funny the lyrics are, it was just a joy for me. It's just one of those little.
Well, it was a joy for me too, and it's also, it's great that like the librettist is showing me music that I haven't heard, but also I think it was kind of wonderful because in a way I feel like I stumbled across all of that very kind of organically and authentically, and had been listening to those pieces prior to writing the very first aria. Because I think it is important for those influences to be seeping in, but to be natural. So I'm not just like trying to write something that's in X style, that like there's some sort of organic influence that goes on. And so it was really beautiful. And you're absolutely right about the lyrics. So I transcribed, I think it was 3 or 4 of the Frats Quintet's a cappella songs into 4-part for 4 voices, essentially. And actually, like the notes and transcribing, that was absolutely fine. The difficult thing was in transcribing the patois, which I definitely needed help with from Pat. And it was so funny actually, because in transcribing some of the patois, the bits that I did understand, I couldn't make sense of the sentence until I'd finished, and then it just turned out to be the most sort of hilarious line. It was something about someone stealing a dumpling. What was the dumpling line? But I just found absolutely hilarious. It was like someone has stolen this dumpling, and it was, seriously spending like hours doing this transcription.
Like she's put her red dress on to go and cause trouble.
That's right.
And those songs were the newspaper of the day. They would have musicians singing them, and they would be telling stories, news stories or folk stories. And so they have this huge storytelling content, but a lot of it is codified. So you've got stories about, infidelity, but they're hidden conversation about trains and tunnels. I mean, it's just right. But I'm so glad that I managed to share the joy of that with them, because that was so much a part of my childhood.
Then my father and mother used to have blues parties in the basement, on a Friday, and cook lots of food, and it'd be a whole thing.
So how did you get into opera, of all things?
Well, you know, my dad had the typical West Indian record collection, right? So just all the old favorites that people had in their record collection, and but somehow he had heard, he always has liked actually Johann Strauss. He would love to go to Vienna to do that kind of thing that they do at Christmas with all the waltzing.
Yeah.
And so he's always like that. And he had heard an opera chorus, but he couldn't remember what it was. And so he would send my mother off to the library to get like albums of opera.
Right.
And he never would, and he never could remember it. But so we had things scattered around. But then one day when I was going through the records, there was this white lady on a cover, and it was Krista Ludwig singing the Brahms Alto Rhapsody, and it must have struck a real big chord. And I was always interested in music. I don't know why, from a past life. So at Westfield, I would go and play like the flute, and they would bring me a flute, find a peripatetic teacher. The flute lasted 2 weeks because I couldn't make a sound. Then I played the clarinet. I was on a brass instrument, and I went through like 4 or 5 instruments. I got to violin. This is before I sang. I got to violin. My mother said, if you give that up, you're not playing another instrument. So I had to stick with violin.
Right.
So there was always a curiosity. And then hearing this Krista Ludwig also obviously inspired me. And so we were having a really boring music class. Don't know what we were doing, singing part songs. It was really boring. So I started making that noise. Because I was, like I said, skiving school. I was a little delinquent at that school.
Sure.
And and then the teacher was like, oh my God, would you like to have some singing lessons because you have an amazing voice? And I said, can I get out of math? Can I exchange it for math?
Right.
Like, no, you can't, Alice.
Wow. And that was...
And so that's how it, and you know, in Bedford at that time we had, what was his name? Michael Rose. And the whole music thing was really very good.
Yeah.
In Bedford. And so, you know, they gave me sort of my Bedford High School gave me money to go Watford School of Music. Then the county gave me money to go to Junior Guildhall. They got me into the orchestra, and they really kind of helped me a lot. So what about you? How do you start?
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of it's a sort of weird
boy from Bedford in a comprehensive.
A boy from Bedford in a comprehensive, because I think, like, I don't know how you feel, but, you know, often, I don't know, people will usually ask, like, when did you start? Because I started playing the trumpet first of all, and then the piano and all of that. But I think for me, the music thing began way before I was able to play an instrument, and actually way before I listened to classical music at all. You know, I sort of pretty much grew up on Motown and hip hop and really early house music, because it was sort of like kind of the very late 80s, early 90s. That was kind of my period. And I ended up just wandering into Bedford Library and seeing a whole bunch of like really weird looking CD covers. And there was this amazing CD cover that had some artwork of Klimt. And it was a CD cover to Mahler's Sixth Symphony.
Okay.
And I just took it and listened to it, and it was just the craziest thing that I'd ever heard in my life. And I just really wanted to work it out. And then during that time, I then moved to St. Thomas More, the upper school. The sort of like the kind of Catholic school route from St. Bede's to Thomas More, and they had a choir there, and I just started singing in the choir, and literally that was it. And so it was, even though I have the voice of a composer, shall we say, certainly my earliest memories of making music was just singing in choirs, and that sense of oneness that you get, I think, from singing, which is kind of quite amazing. But I always really just wanted to find out, like, how all of that stuff is done. You know, how can I form an existence where I'm in that kind of world all the time in a way. And so I was.
But the trumpet and the piano, was it that you had an interest in it, or the teacher was like, here, you're going to learn this?
I think the trumpet was something that was kind of assigned to me, and it was great because I then had the whole orchestral experience, and I'm really grateful for that I wasn't just given like the piano to play, because often it takes a while before really you're playing in groups with the piano, whereas the trumpet is almost immediate. You're all in ensemble straight away, and I think that was kind of, for me anyway, that was sort of a really important part of playing, and being in that world of kind of orchestral sounds was just a joy. Well, as a violinist, right? I mean, it's just there's nothing quite like it in a way. So yeah, so that's kind of it really. But before then, I was like writing rap lyrics. I mean, I thought I was going to be the next LL Cool J. That was kind of my thing in a way. And so I had a strange well, probably as you did too, a kind of strange late period during my teens where I was listening to Mantronics and LL Cool J and Run DMC, interspersed with Tchaikovsky, Debussy, Messiaen, Haydn, and it was just all. It didn't seem strange to me that I would just move from one to the other in that way. And I even created sort of mixtapes that were like a hodgepodge of all of these kind of different musical styles. And I think as I began to grow up, I realized that the sort of tapes, the mixtapes that I'd created was really almost a reflection of me, I think, and I suppose like how I see myself almost culturally as kind of belonging to these two different worlds, But
then, so you must have been quite an anomaly then, because I mean, I was. And nobody did what I did, and nobody, and black girls would say, "Oh, she thinks she's white," and I mean, it was because no one listened to classical music and wanted to play classical music. Did you? Were you sort of like that? Your peers?
I think so. I think. I mean, you probably know this too. I mean, I think growing up in Bedford, because it's not. There is some. There's a big Asian community, and there is also a Caribbean community, but it is relatively small, I think. And so I think I probably always felt like a little bit of an outsider anyway, because I sort of looked different. So for me, it wasn't weird embracing classical music, because I think most, young kids or whatever would see people engaged in classical music as being something that an outsider would do anyway. So for me, there was something kind of quite, it felt kind of like coming home in a weird sort of way. It was like I found my weirdness and my oddness in a way, my differentness, sort of through that. So so that's it really, I think. And how about you?
I think it was difficult for me in some ways because I always wanted to fit in, and I remember one of my earliest performances, the cool black girls were doing this dance, and I really wanted to be a part of it, and they were like, they just weren't interested in me because I really wasn't like them, and I couldn't speak patois, and I didn't understand it because I didn't grow up with that. So why should I pretend that I speak it? And so finally, I think a couple of friends begged on my behalf and they let me in. And we were supposed to wear a white long shirt and stockings. So, no, tights. So I went to the corner shop on the way to school and I bought tights. Only come to find out that they were stockings. And I didn't have a suspender, or I didn't know so I put them on and I started doing the dance in assembly, and the whole assembly erupted because I'm dancing, trying to pull up my tights, the stockings as they're falling down, and I completely ruined. So, and then so that was the end of my trying to be accepted with them. So I was always, and like I said, the white girls would say, "Oh, she thinks she's black." And the ones that would stick up for me actually were the black boys. They said, "No, she's just different. She's just different." because I was very individual. I've never been a conformist.
Sure.
Even, you know, at one point when I was growing up, everybody who was into Black culture, black and white, the girls would wear pleated skirt and a Pringle top. That was like the uniform.
Right.
I would wear like blue lipstick and pajama bottoms. And I was often taken aside. I remember walking in town with blue lipstick, and one of the cool guys, like from the sound, or like Alison, why are you wearing blue lipstick? You can't wear blue lipstick. And they always were trying to make me rein me in, but I never was one. And now, you know, I get a lot of respect from people because they see where my career has taken me and the traveling, and some of them haven't been out of Bedford, you know, so they but it always struck me, you know, sometimes when they would argue, when they would say, oh, you think you're white or something, I said, why are you limiting yourself? You know, music doesn't have a color. It's what speaks to you. And I said, you're just the world puts you in a box, and now you're putting yourself in a box. I said, tell me about Black history. Because even at the age of 11, I was an avid reader, and I realized that whatever they had told me about history was not it. It was like two sentences, and that covers slavery and colonialism. So I availed myself of information, and then so I'd be like, you know, I remember telling one person, I said, tell me about Black history, and you know nothing about Black history, and you're criticizing me. So yeah.
The audience that we hope to engage and that will come are going to be quite diverse. There's going to be people that know these stories, and people who don't really know the stories or know the culture, and we have to engage everybody. And part of my, when I was thinking about this Windrush Opera, I knew that I wanted like a big explosive beginning. I wanted my Auntie Carmen, who's now 90 something, to recognize things in there. I wanted, you know, another person to be able to, you know, melodies or tunes, or not even tunes, but rhythms that people will be sort of tapping a little bit and like recognizable, but the difficulty is without patronizing or making it too, what's the word, cliche, or, you know, stereotypical perhaps is the word. But I wanted, you know, everybody to be like, oh yeah, you know, I remember that, like the ska rhythm there, and have those things. So that I just wanted it, but like I said, not being too simplistic in its form. I think is wonderful in the way that you write, Des. But so the other thing in terms of audiences, our intention is to tour around the country to places perhaps like Bristol, where there was, you know, where slaves were brought in, and then, you know, where there's now big Black communities, and there's a history there prior to Windrush and our arrival. But it's about educating as well. So we want to develop education modules that will go prior to the Windrush, that we can take to schools. In the lobby, we want to have, you know, in my mind, we would film a lot of first generation Windrush people and have them talking about their experience, and we just have like a video installation somewhere of them just talking. Maybe, I love the idea, I think you introduced it, Des, of maybe teaching some of the quintet that's now the quartet, 4-part, and having them sung and telling, you know, so it's even before they go into the opera, it's a sort of big, you know, we're telling the stories and representing history, and they're learning even before they come in, and awakening their senses even more to what they're about to.
Yes. it's that idea of the Caribbean being people with maracas and straw hats, or it's the idea of the Caribbean being one of the most exciting cultures. It has blended elements from Africa, from Europe, from Native American cultures and so on, and created something truly exciting. So if we can create the world that they were walking into, where that is a sensibility, because I've actually at Talwa seen audiences come in looking a little bit sheepish as if this is not their space. And when they've enjoyed the play and they've seen themselves reflected, they walk out as if this is their space. And to me, that is the most precious experience. If we can get people who come in, you know, the older folks, the young ones who come in and say, yes, that is my story, who can literally just relax and let the arias, you know, tell that the story work for them. That to me would be the greatest reward, that it becomes a telling of a huge story, but also a celebration. Because I've got so tired over the years of people thinking, you know, oh, what we will do is shake maracas and sing a calypso and everything is fine. That is so utterly, you know, disrespectful of the depth of the history that is there. But also that our only story is Black pain, because it isn't. It's much more complex than that, and it's much more international than that. So that it could become a world in which people come, they sit, they see the story, they understand it, and they walk out with these sort of heads held high, you know, I think is, yeah, that's something I would really like to achieve. And I have to tell you, I will warn you from now, and I'm sure you found it with Pegasus, whenever Talwa did a play that was successful, we had the stickiest audiences in the world. All the SMs were trying to, stage managers were trying to get everybody out of the theater, because people stopped and talked about it for like an hour afterwards, and they wanted to lime and they wanted to chat, because it was such a wonderful moment for them to see themselves reflected in that way. So yeah, this idea that it becomes a you know, 360-degree experience is just, yeah, it's really exciting. It's something that I think would work wonderfully, and I think is important, particularly now.
I feel kind of like that really resonates, at least with my understanding of what Pegasus has been doing over the last 30 years. You know, particularly this aspect in terms of making a format like opera incredibly inclusive. Has certainly been my experiences in seeing now two sort of Pegasus performances, that there really has been this sense in which opera is for everyone, and that format is for everyone. And yeah, I think I've done genuinely a sort of an incredible job with that, because the audiences, they do walk away feeling as if they own a part of this, and that it is something that belongs to all of us.
But it's also the range of talent that's there. When you hear these absolutely beautiful voices coming off the stage, and you see somebody described opera singers as the Olympic athletes of singing, right. And it's absolutely, you if you're sitting in an audience and you have a couple of tenors coming at you, it's like you feel it, literally almost physically feel it. There is a power to the art form, you know, I want people to experience and to enjoy and to feel that this is my story being told in this way.
Right. And my thing with Pegasus, and when we perform, especially in the concerts that we do, I always tell the audience, it's like you are friends that have come into my living room, that's the grand, and that, you know, we are just sharing stories, which is the narratives of whatever pieces we're singing, and you know, and it's not, because often in opera it's them and us, and in classical concerts, we're performing to you. And you know, I think that I don't want our audiences, especially in concerts, I want them to feel like, oh, this can be for me, I enjoy this. There are going to be certain people who have expectations of it, because when they're thinking the Harry Belafonte type type thing, or you know, they have a notion of what they think it should be.
Yeah.
And how much, and you know, and we don't pander to that, but how much do you think about that? Like, you know, in terms of,
you know, over all the years, the one thing that I've learned to trust is audiences over critics. Audiences get stuff. Audiences buy a ticket because they want to see stuff, and they'll let you know if they don't like it. Yeah, but I feel there's a much stronger sense of what the connection is and what the work is about between the artist and the audience, and then between the artist and the critic. So although I will listen to criticism and I'll understand that there are whole institutions built around certain critical responses, I will never allow that to be what I respond to in my writing. My writing will always be about telling a story to an audience in the best way that I can. Because I think if you spend your whole time trying to please many masters, you please none. Frankly.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think you just have to plow on. I think this is the thing as a creative person. Our job is risk. We do the best we can. We offer it, and we take the risk. And it's slightly addictive because we always hope that it's going to do what we want it to do, you know. But I just think that this is too important for us to doubt it. We just need to get on with doing it as best we possibly can. Yeah. And I often find that initial responses are usually tempered by the time an audience response and an artist response is taken into account. You know, you'll get people who don't like change, and that's fine. But we are a people that meld and blend and create and whatever. So if you come into our thing, that's what you're going to see. For me, firstly, I want some glorious young people to have the most amazing roles that they've ever had and to feel that they can settle into them like, this is what I've always wanted to do. That's one. Des?
I think that it would be great for particularly younger generations of people from Caribbean heritage and backgrounds to see parts of their history realized in a way that's different, that might kind of surprise them in a way, which I think would be interesting. And also as well, I think for people from non-Caribbean backgrounds to see the story of Windrush told with, you know, but created by people who have that connection in a way to the Windrush generation, that it should be our story that we tell in that way, perhaps in a format that they might be used to, but a story that they're not used to, if that makes sense. So I think those would be maybe the things that I think I would like impact-wise the opera to have.
This kind of, I mean, look at this absolutely gorgeous photograph of these young men. Everyone's got a hat, they've got a suit, which I know was built by a tailor in Jamaica or Barbados or Trinidad or wherever that they're coming from. The fact of where they are, the fact, I mean, they're just so gorgeous. This is what I meant about celebration. They're in this setting, but look at them. His handkerchief is perfect. And then we're juxtaposing this with the idea of time passing, which we're using the kind of domino game for. That idea of how do we establish the characters? How do we establish the tensions, who they are? But it's just the youth and the hopefulness and the energy in that you see, that spring, you know, all sorts of ideas sort of spring from that.
And they were always so impeccable, you know, because they were impeccably dressed.
And this, again, this is another, look at the piled up suitcases with the tags and the sort of hope but vulnerability in this face. And look how crisply dressed she is.
Yeah.
This, you know, that dress was probably handmade. You can see the top stitching on it, that the hat matches, the hair has been done. I don't know how you do that on board a ship when you're in, you know, that kind of accommodation. And again, you've got that lovely gentleman on the left with the sort of worry on his face. But again, sharply dressed, tie, hat. Yeah. He's arrived in the motherland. He's going to make a good impression. So it's all of these things that feed in. And you know, there's a small detail that, again, as having grown up in Jamaica, do you see those baskets that are made out of straw or coconut leaves and then embroidered with raffia with flowers? They're so typical. And they would have held food or spices or, you know, apart from the brown suitcases, which we used to call dulciminas, they've got these baskets that have carried all of the things from home to England. I don't know what they brought. Were they photographs? Was it pimento? Did they bring rum? I don't know. But it's just, yeah. So the photographs like these and this part of the montage just makes you
And that must have been one of the things they were so glad for bringing if they bought spices, because with the bland food in England, glad for the spices.
Yep. And you get people to send it from home too as well.
Yeah.
But look at the charm of these faces, Again, these are the things that you pick up on, and then, you kind of strengthen, and things change. But it's again trying to convey this essence of young, hopeful, ambitious, charming, vulnerable, all of these other things. So yeah, this is kind of, I fed into it, but essentially, bless you, that you actually structured. I do in words, but he has done in pictures. We've got a shape and a very, very strong structure.
Thank you, Pat and Des, for contributing to this wonderful talk. It's been very insightful, and we look forward very much to seeing the work grow and the final product. Pegasus Opera is always looking for support, and there are many ways that you can support us. You can join our mailing list. You can make donations. That would be wonderful. You can follow us on social media. Our website is www.pegasusoperacompany.org, and we look forward to seeing you in 2023 when we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Windrush generation. Please, if you go on the website, please subscribe, and thank you very much for listening to this lovely chat. Thank you so much.